Hello, hello, hello! Greetings, salutations, konnichiwa, and every other form of green across this vast, marvelous multiverse. I am Matsu Quinox. This is Horace, and welcome back, my dear, marvelous, wonderful scholars, to the study. Hello there, hello there, hello there, hello there, Julian20. Hello there. Thank you for the resubscribe, Julian20. Welcome, all you marvelous, wonderful, astonishing scholars. How are you all doing this fine afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you are, whenever you are, across this marvelous, wonderful, 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 wonderful omniverse? How are you all doing? Ah, ah. Oh, I just realized I got an empty water bottle right next to me. Julian 20, fabulous. Wonderful to hear it. Wonderful to hear it. Wonderful to hear it. Ah, uh, yeah, I can't talk, my dear scholars. But today for myself was an okay day. I mean, I can't really complain. It was alright, nothing extraordinary happened. Although Horace and I are getting excited for the festival season. It's marvelous time. It's a marvelous time of year. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say marvelous because of what it represents, but it is a great time and a really fun time to go. Oh, hello there, hello there, Firefly. Welcome, evening to you as well. Hello there, Private Maverick. I guess I had to start over. Oh well, you have a three-stream streak. That's okay, Private Maverick. It means whatever it is, Private Maverick. It just means as much to me as if it was 1,000 stream streak. I'm just glad to have you here. Julian20, you love festival times. Well, I do too. I do too. I mean, the festival I often go to is a little more solemn, but it is enjoyable to see people as much as I can escape the study, that is. I mean, I'm allowed to go outside the study for maybe a day at best. I get to wear my yukata, which I still like. I wish I could turn a little bit more. I can't show you my back. I can't actually rotate this, but still, you get a good look at it. But yes, I am so excited, and I'm so glad you're all here to share in this excitement. I mean, it's just a wonderful time to be with friends and to see others. Oh, I'm just glad you're all around here. So yes, yes. 1 second, my dear scholars. I feel like I'm gonna sneeze. Or not. You know, I could be mistaken. Oh my goodness gracious. So anyway, I digress. As you can probably tell, we are doing festival activities. This stream specifically, I am going to be telling some folk tales and fairy tales from Japan. I actually have some new collections with me, which I'm really excited to read from. There are some familiar stories on there, so I am going to probably skip those ones, or at least save them for later in the stream. I did add a new redeem. If you look on your list, there is a brand new one. In that I actually have some Japanese snacks. They're right behind me. You can't see them. I will eat a Japanese snack during the stream for that redeem. Um, I have a bunch of different ones. Some of them are familiar. Some of them are brands that I really don't recognize. Salt, sweetie, sweet, whatever. Why did I say sweetie? Private Maverick, neat. Yes, that is very neat, and it also means I don't have to. Oh my goodness, we already have one. Oh, Julian20 snack time. Let me see what I got. Hold on. Okay, let's try this one. You lead Firefly. What are they? Well, if it, I want to surprise people. So this one I'm gonna eat right now. It is my Japanese is a little rough. Hold on. Oh, I can't read it. I'm having a hard time reading tonight, my dear scholars. I mean, I can read hiragana and katakana. I just can't remember which symbol this is. Well, I'll just set that aside for now. It is a Hokkaido brand one. It's Meiji brand. Hokkaido, and it is a strawberry cream filling with white chocolate and milk chocolate in there. I can't really tell what it is, but I'm going to eat this one. You, my dear scholars. Mm, mm. I'm a little surprised. The strawberry cream filling is not that creamy. Mm, but it's really good. Ah, I do have non-sweet candies and things as well. So if any of you redeem it, I will eat other ones. I I will eat some of the other ones. Mm. Julian 20. I had bim bam baff for dinner. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Was it any good, Julian 20? As I can ask. Julian 20 is a Korean dish. Yes, very good. Oh, nice. Oh, that's wonderful. Mm. Oh, yeah. I've only eaten a little bit of Korean food. I really haven't eaten a lot. What I have eaten, I liked. Oh, but anyway, I digress. Oh my goodness, I'm getting off track. So, my dear scholars, shall we start our reading of some Japanese folktales? You need 20, yes, please. All right. Um, this will be interesting. So then, my dear scholars, sit back, relax, have a hot or cold beverage of your liking. Dim the lights if you wish, and we'll begin with some Japanese folk tales and fairy tales for your entertainment. You only 20 or some sake. I actually have about, I think, 3 bottles of sake put away. So technically, I could have some sake, but I want to say sober for this reading. And the thing with sake, and they don't really talk about this much, is that once you open the bottle, you really want to finish it off in one go, or at least in the day, because sake does not last very long. At least its best qualities don't last very long. All right then. Oh, hello there, Drazov. Welcome. That is good to know. We'll have to remember that. Also, hello. We are about to start some folk tales from Japan. I have a couple collections that I managed to get my hands on, actually from a festival I went to. So some of these stories should be interesting. Some of them, most of them, I don't recognize. Some of them, you might. Excuse me. Again, I'm going to be coughing loud. For our first tale, my dear scholars, let us begin with the story of Gonbi, the duck hunter. Once upon a time, there was a duck hunter named Gombe. Every day he'd go to the pond behind his house to hunt for ducks, but he almost always came home empty-handed. Gonbe, you see, was a very poor shot. When he started shooting, even the ducks seemed to laugh and tease him, but that didn't stop him from being ambitious. I wish there was a way to get 100 ducks at once, Gonbei often thought. Wouldn't that be something? Well, one day he had an idea. He gathered up all the old rifles he could find, tied them together in a bundle, and rigged the triggers with a string. Then he set out for the duck pond. Unfortunately, there was only 4 or 5 ducks at the pond that day. Just my luck, thought Gonby. Oh well, 4 or 5 is better than none. He aimed his bundle of rifles and pulled the string. Blam! Boom! Bang! The explosion was so great that Gonbei ended up flat on the seat of his trousers. But when the smoke cleared, he looked up to see the ducks still flying about as if nothing had happened. He hadn't hit a single one.
Quack, quack. You missed again, Gonby,
laughed the ducks.
Quack, quack.
Gonbei went home empty-handed again that day. But he wasn't about to give up. There must be a way to get 100 ducks at once, he kept telling himself. Day after day, week after week, Gonbei thought and thought and thought. It was late in autumn, on the coldest, snowiest night of the year, when he finally had another idea. He found a long rope and headed for the duck pond. The pond was covered with ice, and a great flock of ducks was sitting there, all of them asleep. Gonbei tiptoed out onto the ice and grabbed the first duck he came to. And just as he hoped, it didn't even open its eyes. The night was so cold, you see, that all the ducks had frozen solid.
Yahoo!
Shouted Gonbei.
There must be 100 ducks here, and they're all mine for the taking.
He spent the rest of the night tying up the ducks with his rope. Then, when he was finished, he counted them all.
97? 98? 99?
Well,
That's not quite 100, he said to himself. But not bad, not bad.
dawn had broken by the time Gonbei threw the rope over his shoulder and started for home, dragging the 99 ducks behind. But, my dear scholars, what do you think happened? Hmm? You see, Gonbei hadn't gone very far at all when the ducks, warmed by the rising sun, began to thaw out. One by one, by one, by one, they started to flap their wings and head for the sky. And poor Gonbei, still holding on to the rope, was carried along with them.
Whoa! Yikes! Help!
Up and up and up he went, and soon he was much too high to let go.
Help me! Somebody!
Screamed Gonbei. Not, of course, that there was anything anyone could have done. He was too far up. The ducks flew south for what seemed like hours. They flew over the mountains, over a great forest, and over miles and miles of rice paddies. Finally, poor Gonby couldn't hold on to the rope any longer. Excuse me. His hands slipped, and down he went, hurtling head over heels towards earth.
Oh no!
Crash! Gonbei landed flat on his back in a big field of millet. It was harvest time, and a number of local farmers working in the field saw him plummet out of the clouds. They all dropped what they were doing and ran to where Ganbei lay.
That fella fell from the sky. Maybe he's part duck. Look how his eyes are rolling around.
They carried Ganbei to the farmhouse and put him to bed. Later, when his eyes stopped rolling and he could talk again, he told them what had happened.
Well, Gombe,
Said one of the farmers after they'd all marveled at his story.
you are a long way from home now. Why don't you stay with us a while and help harvest the millet?
So the next morning, Ganbei went to work in the millet field. It was a pleasant, peaceful life, and Ganbei rather enjoyed his new job. Before even a week had passed, however, his big ambitions began to get the best of him again.
There must be some way, he thought, to pick 100 bushels of millets all at once.
Uh-oh. Well, as luck would have it, it was only a few days later that Ganbei stumbled across the biggest millet plant he, or anyone else for that matter, had ever seen. The grains of millet were as big as your head, and so heavy that the tip of the plant was drooping down to the ground.
Gosh, there must be 100 bushels of grain on this one, cried Gombe. Yahoo!
He took hold of the plant with one hand and started to cut with the other. And no sooner, my dear scholars, had the heavy grains dropped to the ground than the giant plant whipped back upright with Gombe still holding on.
Yikes!
Well, said one of the workers as he watched Gombe soaring off towards the clouds, there he goes again. I think that's the right way, my dear scholars, to react to such a sight, wouldn't you agree? Now then, Ganbei flew out of the millet field over a few rice paddies and across a mountain range. Then, almost before he realized what had happened, he was coming down over a strange town.
Look out below!
Splash! Fortunately, this wasn't the end for Ganbei. He landed right in a big rain barrel. Soon, a group of townspeople were gathered around him, gawking.
Did you see that? One of them said. He fell out of the sky. Do you think he's a god? Awful shabby looking god, if you ask me.
They made such a fuss that Ganbei thought he would die of embarrassment. He crawled out of the barrel, ran down the street, and ducked inside the first open doorway he came to. It happened to be an umbrella maker's shop. Now, the umbrella maker, a good-humored, kind-hearted fellow, invited Ganbei to sit down. He offered him a cup of tea and asked how he got so wet. Ganbei told him the whole story, and the umbrella maker laughed till tears ran down his cheeks.
You're an awfully amusing fellow, Ganbei, he said. Why don't you stay here and work for me?
And so, Ganbei became the umbrella maker's assistant. It wasn't a bad life, and he came to enjoy the job very much. He worked hard coating the umbrellas with oil and drying them in the sun. And he was sure he'd soon be turning out 100 a day. Impressive. But, my dear scholars, one day, Gombe was in the back garden drying the umbrellas when a strong wind began to blow and one of them started rolling away. Now Gonbei ran after it and grabbed the handle just as the wind lifted it up into the air. And before he knew it, he was flying again. People on the streets of the town stood staring up at Gonbei as he disappeared among the clouds.
"I declare," said one of them, "that fellow sure seems to like the sky."
As a matter of fact, Gonbei was getting to like the sky pretty well.
"I guess I was just born to fly," he said to himself. My, what a view!"
Gonbei sailed across a mountain range and over miles of fields and forests and rivers and hills. He was having a wonderful time. But then, all of a sudden, an especially strong gust of wind came along. Crack! Went the umbrella, turning inside out. "Uh-oh!" said Gonbei. He was falling again, head over heels. Whoa! Splash! This time, too, he landed in water. But when he came up for a look, wiping his eyes and spluttering, guess, my dear scholars, what he saw. He was right back in the old duck pond near his house. The ducks were flying around above him, quacking and laughing.
"Wah, wah! Look who's back! Gombe can fly, but he can't catch us!"
Scowling and shaking his fist at the ducks, Gombe climbed out of the pond. He was up on shore, wringing out his shirt, when he felt something wet and slippery squirming around in his underwear. He stepped out of his trousers and was astonished to find that they were full of loaches, his favorite kind of fish.
"Well, how do you like that?" said Gombe, grinning. "Loaches! There must be 100 of them."
He slung his trousers over his shoulder and set off for home, happy as a man can be.
"And next time," he said to himself, "I'm going to get me 100 ducks."
That is the story of Gombe. What was the title again? Gombe the Duck Hunter. Oh, hello there, Yumiko. Welcome. What did you walk into? You walked into some Japanese folk tales. Apparently, the lesson of this story is one should always temper one's ambitions. After all, if Gonbei had not tried to capture 100 ducks, he wouldn't be in this situation. Granted, I don't know what he would have done with 100 ducks, but still, that's not us to wonder and why. Guess. Ah. Don't you don't you scholars agree that maybe Ganbei should have waited a little bit? Yulian 20, poor guy. In a way, yes, in a way. All right. Are you ready for another tale, my dear scholars? What say you? Private Maverick, yes, please. Julian 20, yes, indeed. Hello there, Zen. Welcome. You're just in time for another folk tale from Japan. This story concerns one sleepyhead Taro. Long, long ago, in a little village in the mountains, there lived a very unusual man. Now, this man's name was Taro, but everyone in the village called him Sleepyhead. And they called him that, my dear scholars, for a very good reason. Sleepyhead Taro never worked in the fields with the other villagers, nor did he go to the mountains to hunt and fish. All he ever did, in fact, was sleep. Day and night, night and day, he lay on his mat and snored. Mushrooms had sprouted on the dark, damp floor around Sleepyhead's mat, and each day a family of mice would come to gather them. Sometimes the baby mice would scamper about in Taro's clothes, playing hide and seek. But even then, he didn't wake up. Often the village children would come to play tricks on the sleeping man. They'd tickle his nose, tug on his arms and legs, even bounce up and down on his belly. But Taro would just go on snoring. Whenever the grown-ups caught their children teasing Taro, they'd get very angry. "Stay away from that worthless lazybones!" they'd shout. "Don't you want to catch the sleeping sickness?" You can hardly blame them for looking down on Taro. After all, he'd done nothing but snooze for 3 long years. Now, he probably would have starved if it weren't for his poor old mother. She worked as a servant in the village chief's house, and though her wages were meager, she always made sure her son had enough to eat. Every evening, she'd go to Taro's hut and set a rice ball down beside him. Taro's nose would begin to twitch, and he'd grope around in the dark till he found the treat. Then he'd stuff it into his mouth and chew. All this without even waking up. Much as he loved to sleep, however, once every 10 days or so, Taro would get up, stumble outside, and climb to the top of the cliff near his house. Maybe, my dear scholars, you can guess why. I personally cannot. That's right, my dear scholars. Everybody's got to go sooner or later. And imagine how bad you'd want to go after 10 whole days. For what seemed like hours, Sleepyhead Tar would stand there at the top of the cliff, doing his business. Sometimes a rainbow would form in the sky, and people in the village would look up shake their heads, and say, "There he goes again." From the cliff, Sleepyhead Taro's, well, let's be honest, his stream would flow out in a great arc, landing and on the other side of the river and rush down the slope towards the village, carving great furrows in the ground as it went. There were dozens of these furrows running through the village by now.
Not only is he lazy,
The villagers would grumble.
he's crude and filthy, too, and he's washing away our precious soil.
Now, my dear scholars, remember, such things do happen. So please find no offense in this story. As soon as he was done, of course, Sleepyhead Taro would stumble back to his hut, flop down on his mat, and go back to sleep. Month after month, through all kinds of weather, he'd snore and snore and snore. The longer this went on, the more the people in the village came to hate him. When the rain stopped falling in the third summer of Taro's great sleep, the people were quick to blame it on him. All summer long, day after day, my dear scholars, the sun had been beating down mercilessly. The earth was cracked and dry, and the crops were withering in the fields. It was, in all honesty, the worst drought in the history of the village. And though the people prayed for rain, their prayers went unanswered. What could they do? Soon they'd have nothing to eat. Sleepyhead Taro, for his part, went right on sleeping. The only difference was that he hadn't taken one of his famous walks to the cliff for over a month now. Not that anyone noticed at first, mind you. They were all much too worried about themselves to give any thought to someone so lazy and useless. They'd forgotten all about him. In fact, until the night the village chief called them to his house for a meeting.
My fellow villagers, the chief announced, heaven knows we've done all we can to save the village. But work and pray as we might, the drought goes on. There can only be one reason for this. The gods are angry with us. Why? I'll tell you why. It's because there's a cursed sinner in our midst, and as long as he lives here, I believe this drought will continue.
The villagers looked at each other, murmuring and nodding. Then they turned to stare coldly at Sleepyhead Taro's poor mother, who bowed her head and cringed in the corner.
The chief's right, someone said. While all of us are suffering, that lazy bum, Sleepyhead Taro, is snoring away with a silly grin on his face. Sprawled out on the floor of his hut for 3 years. No wonder the gods are angry. It's up to us to punish him. Let's go.
The people all rushed outside, armed themselves with sticks, clubs, and stones, and began stealing up the slope to Sleepyhead's hut. They just got near the open doorway of the hut, however, when Taro suddenly sat up. The villagers stopped in their tracks and watched as Taro wiped a cobweb from his face, stood up, and came outside.
Be careful, said the village chief. No telling what this devil's up to now.
Taro didn't even seem to notice the villagers, however. He was stumbling up the path to the cliff behind his hut. When he reached the top of the cliff, he stood next to a great boulder looked down towards the river and the village beyond and began fumbling with his clothes. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize this story, my dear scholars, is so interesting. Shall I go on with it or change to another story? What do you think, my dear scholars? Are you scandalized, or shall we enjoy this story for all its interesting angles? All right, we'll continue.
That good for nothing slugabud!
Someone shouted.
Doing his business at a time like this. Let's get him!
But before the villagers could begin running after Taro, the village chief stopped them, saying,
This'll be his last big one. Let him enjoy it, and we'll get him when he comes back down.
Now, my dear scholars, it had been more than a month since Taro had relieved himself. And you can imagine, once he started, he seemed to go on forever. It was like a mighty waterfall rolling down the slope towards the village, and the trench it left behind was as wide and deep as a riverbed. When Taro was finally finished, he sighed, yawned, and turned to the giant boulder beside him. He looked at it for a moment, then placed the palms of his hands against the rock and began to push. Little by little, the boulder tilted forward until at last it toppled over the edge of the cliff. As the boulder fell, it knocked loose other big rocks, and soon a great landslide was crashing down the slope toward the river. And when the dust cleared, my dear scholars, "Look!" one of the villagers shouted. "The rocks have dammed up the river!" So they had. The dam caused the river to overflow its banks, and all the water ran right into the deep trench that Sleepyhead Taro's last big flood had made. Down toward the village it flowed in a powerful rush, and as it neared the village, the water began to branch off into the ditches made by Taro over the past 3 years. The villagers stood with their mouths open, staring at disbelief at what they saw. "The water!" one of them finally said. "The water's going right to our fields!" The people started jumping up and down, hugging each other and shouting for joy. "Water! Water! The village is saved! Hooray!" And as they carried on so, a lone figure stood at the top of the cliff, yawning and smiling down at them all. Sleepyhead Taro had spent 3 whole years fast asleep. But, my dear scholars, he wasn't just being lazy. He was putting his brain to work all that time. No one else had ever thought of digging ditches to irrigate the fields. With their new system of ditches, the villagers never had to worry again about drought. Every year from then on, no matter what the weather was like, they had a bountiful harvest. Thanks to the Sleepyhead Canals, as everyone came to call them, the village grew even more prosperous. Oh, and as for Sleepyhead himself, well, he continued to snooze as much as ever. But now, whenever the villagers passed by his hut, they'd stop to bow and leave rice balls and cakes and other good things for him to eat.
Good old Sleepyhead Taro, they'd say. Where would we be without you?
Quite an interesting story. A little crude, a little funny, but with a good ending. Zen, you couldn't scandalize me if every single character grew up redacted and then redacted themselves. I hope not. So, what do you think of that interesting little tale, my dear scholars? Oh, thank you for the hydrate, Yumiko. As you can tell, some of these stories, I'm sure you may have heard or you might not have heard, but they're interesting little tales. I'm switching to another book for this next tale, as I want to read this one to you, my dear scholars. This one, I think you should perhaps dim the lights for. Another hydrate. Perhaps, perhaps, Julian. Zen, I'm seeing the dark. Should I turn the lights on? That no, keep them off. Oh, of course. For this story is entitled. Yumiko, please remember to hydrate that angelic voice. I will try. This story is entitled Leave Them and Go. In a certain part of Edo, long, long ago, there used to be a canal full of big, hungry carp. All you had to do to catch these fish was to tie a hook to the end of a line and dangle it in the water. In a matter of minutes, you'd have more than you could eat in a week. As soon as you started home with your catch, however, a voice would call to you. A spooky voice that seemed to bubble up from beneath the surface of the water. Leave them and go, it would whisper. Leave them and go. If you were brave enough to ignore this and continue walking off with the fish, the voice would gradually grow louder and more insistent. Leave them and go. Leave them and go. Leave them and go. The fact that the canal was next to a graveyard on the grounds of an old run-down temple only added to the eeriness of it all. And anyone who ever caught fish there ended up throwing them back into the water and running for his life. Small wonder that over the years people learned to stay away from the place, which came to be known as the Leave Them and Go Canal. Now, one summer evening, a very stubborn and willful man came marching up to the bank of the canal. This man had a fish shop, and he was determined to return with as many carp as he could carry. Although his wife and his friends had pleaded with him not to go, he simply laughed at them. How's a man to make a living selling fish? He said. If he lets some old wives' tale scare him off. Ha! Just watch me. Zen, F you disembodied voice. I'm gonna eat the fish, then I'm gonna come back and move back here. How's that for leave him and go? Oh, Zen. No sooner had he climbed down the bank and dropped his line in the water than he got his first bite. The fishing was every bit as good as he expected, and in no time at all, he had 2 buckets full of big, tasty looking fish. Ha! He thought. Wait till those cowardly friends of mine see this! He was about to head back home when he decided to have a smoke first. That would make an even better story to tell his wife and friends. Afraid? He could hear himself say. Why, when I caught all the carp I needed, I sat down right there on the bank and smoked my pipe. Smiling smugly, he put the pipe in his mouth, but strangely enough, he never did get around to lighting it. How much time had passed? The man himself had no idea until he heard the midnight bell tolling in the temple. What the? How did it get so late? He wondered, putting away his unlit pipe. I'd better be heading home. He hung the 2 buckets of fish from either end of a wooden pole and hoisted it onto his shoulder. As he was about to start up the bank, however, the water in the canal began to bubble and boil, and a voice whispered, Leave them and go. The man's heart stopped at the sound, but he plugged his ears with his fingers and pretended to ignore it. I can't hear anything. So long. Leave them and go, said the voice. The man's knees were shaking as he scrambled up the bank. Leave them and go. Shut up! I'm taking these fish to show my wife and friends, and that's all there is to it. Goodbye! The man shouted, running along the top of the bank with his fingers still in his ears. Struggling under his heavy load, he ran and ran until he could no longer hear the voice. Ha! He gasped. No old voice is going to scare me. I caught these fish, and nothing is going to make me leave them behind. Zen, leave them and go? How about come at me, ghost bro? Flips off the undead. He had slowed to a walk when he heard the sound of a woman's wooden geta coming toward him. Clip, clop, clippity clop, clip, clop, clippity clop. The sound stopped beneath a willow tree some distance ahead. Behind the man was the Leave Them and Go canal, and on either side of the road was a steep embankment. He had no choice but to walk on toward the willow tree, where the eerie sound of the clogs had ceased. When he reached the tree, a shadowy figure stepped in front of him. The man froze in his tracks, petrified with fear, but just at that moment the moon came out from behind a cloud to reveal a beautiful young woman. What a relief. Please, sell me those fish, sir, the young woman said in a gentle voice. Not a chance, he said. Not till I've shown them to my wife and friends. You won't sell them? There was something sinister about her voice this time. Absolutely not. Are you sure? She said with a ghastly cackle, and she passed a hand over her face.
Even now?
she said, leaning forward. Her face was as smooth as an egg. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. The man let out a blood-curdling scream, threw his precious buckets of fish on the ground, and ran for his life. On and on he ran until he saw the light of a noodle stall at the side of the road. He stumbled up to the stall, gasping for breath, and said, "Water! Please give me some water!" The man tending the stall had his back turned.
You seem to be out of breath, sir, he said. Is something the matter?
"I saw it! I saw it! Back there by the willow tree! I saw it with my own eyes!"
It? What do you mean, it?
said the stall keeper, slowly turning around to face the man.
Something like this, maybe?
The man's knees buckled, and he fell flat on his behind. The stall keeper's face, too, was nothing but a smooth, featureless slab of skin. The man was so terrified that his legs had turned to jelly, and he had to crawl away through the mud on all fours, gasping and whimpering. It seemed like hours before he made it to his house, and somehow managed to pull himself through the doorway.
"What's wrong with you, dear?" said his wife. "Did you hurt your leg?"
"I saw it! I saw two of them!" he gasped, still on his hands and knees.
"Two of what, dear? I don't know what you're talking about, unless you mean—"
"Oh, hello there, Jewelry Jelly! Welcome! Oh, my goodness! Welcome, Jewelry Jelly! It's good to have you here! Hello, Raiders! Let's give you a little shout out. How are you doing, Jewelry Jelly? Did you have some fun? What were you streaming? Oh my goodness. Jewelry Jelly's getting my butt kicked in Bravely Default, so I figured I better hang out here before I start throwing things. Aw. And thank you for the resubscription. Aw, wonderful. I'm sorry you're having a hard time with the game. So, sit back, all you wonderful raiders, and enjoy this story, this folk tale from Japan. You raided just as we were coming to one of the jump scare parts. Oh my goodness, what timing! You timed it perfectly. And for all those who don't know me, I am Matsu Quinox, interdimensional omniversal librarian. I stream gaming streams on Monday, reading streams on Thursday, and a variety of different streams when I can.
Two of what, dear? I don't know what you're talking about. Unless you mean...
The man's heart froze. Slowly he raised his eyes to steal a glance at his wife.
Unless...
She continued, passing a hand over her face.
You mean something like...
No! Not you too! The man screamed and fainted dead away. Now, they say, my dear scholars, that when he came to, he was lying flat on his back in the graveyard next to the Leave Them and Go canal. Let's see. Zen. Oh no, he's blind, deaf, and can't breathe. However, can I defeat him? Wait, so if it still collapses from acute hypoxia. Unit 20. Oh no! Unit 20. Great story. Thank you, thank you. It's a good story. Um, you asked earlier if it's a yokai. Yes, it is a kind of yokai. I'm trying to remember how to pronounce the yokai. It's sometimes called a no face. No, how do you pronounce this thing? 1 second, my dear scholars. Let's do a little research before I go on. It's always good to learn new stuff. Noperable, sometimes called a faceless ghost. Now, noperable are interesting because noperable actually can't hurt you. Um, they can scare you. The most they can do is scare you, and if they did hurt you, you'd probably be scared to death. But they're fairly harmless. They're not they are not they are not a malevolent yokai, but they are mischievous, and they are ones that will go out of their way to scare you. Interestingly enough, Nopeta Bo sightings have been seen as far out as Hawaii, of all places. So they're a yokai that does travel, apparently. Now let's see. Let's do a different story then. Something a little bit less um, frightening. This story, my dear scholars, is entitled Portrait of the Bride. One day, my dear scholars, long, long ago, a very poor young farmer named Hyoroku was tilling his field when he noticed a beautiful maiden sitting on a hill nearby watching him. As soon as their eyes met, the maiden smiled and called his name. Hyoroku, please accept me as your bride. Hyoroku nearly fainted. What? He gasped. Hyoroku, can't you hear what I'm saying? Or do you refuse? No! I mean, yes. I mean, I accept. I accept. I accept. And the very next day, Hyoroku and the beautiful young maiden were wed. Happy as they were together, however, and they were very happy, my dear scholars. Indeed, it soon became clear that they actually had a bit of a problem. Hiroku was so thrilled to have married such a lovely girl that all he ever wanted to do was to gaze at her face. He insisted on being by her side night and day, and that of course made it impossible for him to get any work done. After pondering the problem for some time, the bride, who happened to be an excellent artist, finally came up with a solution. She painted a portrait of herself for Hiroku to take with him when he went out to work. And that's just what Hiroku did. Out in the field the next day, he attached the portrait to a bamboo pole so that it was never out of his sight. He'd work for a while, then gaze at the portrait. Gaze at the portrait, then work for a while, and so on. He was looking at it for what must have been the 100th time that day when suddenly a powerful gust of wind came along and carried the portrait off. Hey! Shouted Hiroku. Wait! Come back! But the wind only lifted the paper higher. Soon it was swept over a hill and out of sight. Now, several miles off in the direction the wind was blowing lay the castle of the lord of that country. Now this lord was something of a dandy. He even powdered his face, and thought himself a very fine man indeed. He was strolling in his garden that day when he saw a piece of paper come fluttering down out of the sky to land at his feet. He picked it up, took one look at the portrait of Hiroku's bride, and fell hopelessly in love. "What a beauty!" he cried. "She's almost as pretty as I!" He ran into the castle and called for his soldiers. "Find this woman," he ordered them. "Whoever she is, she shall be my bride. Don't rest until you've found her." Now the soldiers scoured the countryside for days before finally coming to Hiroku's house. But as soon as they saw the poor man's beautiful bride, they knew the search was over.
Well, 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 said the leader. We've found her at last. Come along then, woman. The Lord wishes to make you his wife.
"What? But she's my wife!" protested Hiroku. "You can't take her from me!" He was no match for the soldiers, however. In no time at all, they tied his hands and feet to keep him from interfering. Then they told the bride to prepare for the trip to the castle, allowing her only a brief moment to say goodbye to her husband. "Hiroku," she whispered, dropping a little pink pouch at his feet. "Inside this pouch is a peach pit. If you plant it, it will grow into a beautiful tree. When the tree bears peaches, I want you to come to the castle to sell them." The bride was fighting back her tears as the soldiers led her away. "I know I'll see you again, my love," she cried. "It may take 3 years, but I know you'll come selling peaches. Won't you, Hiroku?" That was the first of many sad, sad days for Hiroku. Life, it seemed hardly seemed worth living now that he'd lost his beloved bride. Again he found it impossible to work. He would go out to his field each day, only to sit and sigh and stare at the ground. He did plant the peach pit, however, and as the weeks went by he watched it sprout and grow. The little tree never failed to remind him of his wife and what she said to him when they parted. Summer, autumn, winter, spring. The peach tree continued to grow, and so did the pain in Hiroku's heart. It wasn't until the third summer, my dear scholars, when the tree bore lots of lovely pink and golden fruit, that he began to hope that perhaps he would see his beautiful bride again. As soon as the peaches were ripe, Hiroku picked a basketful and set out for the castle. In the castle, meanwhile, the lord was sitting with his lady. He was still as much in love with her as he had been when he'd first seen her portrait, yet he was far from happy. The lady, it seems, hadn't smiled once since coming to live with him. Not one little smile in 3 long years. As they sat together in gloomy silence, the Lord was racking his brains to try and think of a way to bring a smile to the lady's lips. He tried telling jokes and making funny faces, but nothing, my dear scholars, seemed to work. Then, all of a sudden, he heard someone calling from a long way off. Peaches! Peaches! Sweet fresh peaches! The voice grew even nearer until it seemed to be coming from just outside the castle gate. Peaches! Delicious peaches! That voice! Cried the lady. The Lord turned to look at her, and his mouth fell open in amazement. She was smiling. Gods! Shouted the Lord. Bring that peach seller here at once! A short while later, Hiroku was standing before the Lord and Lady. My wife seems to find your voice amusing, peasant. I want you to hawk your peaches right here in front of us. As you wish, my lord, said Hiroku, bowing. With his basket of peaches still on his back, he paraded around the room. Peaches! He hollered. Peaches! Hiroku's sweet, sweet peaches! The lady was laughing uncontrollably now. Hiroku stole a glance at her and winked, his heart pounding with joy at seeing his beautiful bride again. The Lord, for his part, was thrilled to hear his sad lady's laughter at last. He was so delighted with this unexpected change in her mood, in fact, that he ordered Hiroku to trade clothes with him. If you think this peasant is funny, he said to the lady, just watch this. The Lord lifted the basket of peaches onto his back and began marching about. Hiroku, dressed in the Lord's kimono, sat down next to his long-lost bride. Peaches! Shouted the Lord. The Lord's delicious peaches! As the lady continued to laugh, the Lord got so carried away with the game that he marched out of the room and through the castle gate. Peaches! Peaches from the castle! The guards at the gate didn't think anything of it. As far as they were concerned, my dear scholars, it was simply Haruko coming back out. The Lord walked all the way around the outside of the castle, shouting as loudly as he could. And when at last he returned to the gate, he ordered the guards to open up. And who might you be to be giving me us orders? Demanded one of the guards. You're nothing but a lowly peach seller. Begone with you, peasant! Not recognizing his own lord, the guard gave him a great crack on the head with his stick. So it came to pass, my dear scholars, that Hiroku traded places with the Lord and lived happily ever after in the castle with his beautiful bride. Now you might ask, what of the Lord? Well, they say he spent the rest of his life alone, a poor peach seller who would sit and stare for hours at the portrait of his bride. You know, in a way, I suppose I should feel sorry for him, but the Lord did steal away the wife of Hiroku. So, in some ways, it serves him right. trying to find another story, my dear scholars. Ah, yes, this one. Buying a Dream. Now, my dear scholars, this story was told to me personally by a traveler who came passing through into the study. I think you'll find this one of an interest to you all. Now, this story began on a hot summer's day a long time ago. In the middle of a wide, grassy plain stood an enormous old tree. Now, two travelers, one heading east and one heading west, reached the tree at the same time and sat down to rest in its shade. Hot today, isn't it? Said one. It is indeed, the other replied. The two men introduced themselves, and while they were talking about this and that, the taller one pointed to the other's satchel and asked what he had inside. Oh, just papers and paintbrushes. I'm an artist, you see. Is that so? Well, now that's an interesting line of work. I'm a merchant myself, but not much of one, I'm afraid. The merchant, it seemed, had not had a very successful career. Being a cheerful man, however, who loved to talk, he proceeded to tell the artist story after story about his many business failures. So then I thought I'd try to expand my trade in China and India. You don't say. Yes, I had 10 big ships built. 10! 10 big, beautiful ships. But they all went down in a storm at sea. I lost every last one of them. Well, after that, I decided to dig for gold. I dug a big mine in the mountains, but the day after I finally struck a rich vein of ore, the whole thing was buried in a landslide. Just my luck. The artist listened with interest at first, but as the afternoon wore on, he began to grow drowsy and nod off. So finally, I borrowed some money and went into the silk trade. Things started out pretty well, and I soon managed to pay back the money. But on my next trip, I met a gang of bandits in the mountains. They stole all my goods, and I was penniless again. Can you imagine that? The artist had fallen fast asleep. The merchant laughed to himself. Can't blame him. Who wouldn't get sleepy listening to all the mistakes I made? Just listen to him snore. Oh, wait a minute. What's that? The merchant watched in amazement, my dear scholars, as a horsefly crawled out of the artist's left nostril and flew off to the south. Well, he muttered, scratching his head, that's the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life. Now, no more than a few minutes later, however, something even stranger happened. The horsefly came buzzing back, landed on the artist's upper lip, and crawled inside his nose again. Just at that moment, the artist woke up. Goodness, I must have dozed off, he said. What a funny dream I have, though. Let me tell you about it. Please do, said the merchant. The artist took out his paper and brush and began to sketch as he recounted his dream. I don't know where I was, but there was this mountain. In the picture he drew a horse. In the picture he drew, A horsefly was winging along towards the mountain peak. Now, beyond the mountain was a valley, he said, turning to a new page and drawing another picture. And in the middle of the valley was a rich man's mansion. It had a big front gate and two pine trees growing in the garden like this. Well, this horsefly flew straight into the garden and began to buzz in circles around a white camellia. Camella. So what I did was, I got a shovel and dug beneath that flower. And what do you think I found? A big clay pot full of gold! Ha ha! Dreams are certainly funny things, aren't they? Hmm, said the merchant, gazing off in the direction he'd seen the horsefly go. Then suddenly he slapped his knee and said, "My friend, I'd like you to sell me that dream." Sell you my dream? You're joking, of course. No, sir, I'm perfectly serious. But think of what you're saying. Do you see that this is just another of your silly ideas? Don't you see that this is just another of your silly ideas? My good man, at this rate you'll never get ahead in the world. No matter. I want that dream, by heaven, and you can name your price. Private Maverick, there's gold in them hills. Yes, indeed. In the end, the artist reluctantly agreed. The merchant gave him all the money he had, collected the drawings, and marched off towards the south. He walked for days, my dear scholars, for days and days, across the plain, through forests and meadows, and over hills and dales, and finally, one moment, he found it. A mountain exactly like the one in the artist's first picture. He scrambled over the mountain as fast as his legs would carry him, and sure enough, there was the valley and the rich man's mansion. Excuse me. That's it! The merchant shouted. It's the mansion in the dream! Everything was just as the artist had drawn it. The big gate, the two pine trees, and the spacious garden with a pond in the center. But instead of a single camellia bush, as the merchant had imagined, there were dozens of them. The horsefly in the dream had flown to a white camellia, but since none of the bushes were in bloom, the merchant had no idea which one to dig beneath. There was only one thing to do: to wait till the following spring. But as you know, my dear scholars, spring was a long way off, and the merchant had spent all his money on the dream, as you recall. As luck would have it, however, the rich man was in need of a gardener, and the merchant gladly took the job and moved into a hut behind the mansion. It was a lonely life, and the work was very hard, but the merchant never forgot his dream. Each day as he toiled in the garden, he reminded himself that spring was another day closer, and each day the crows laughed at him, and the frogs in the pond sang, but at last, after many months, spring arrived, and countless buds appeared on the camellia bushes. The merchant watched and waited anxiously until finally, one moment, one morning, he awoke to see that the bushes had burst into bloom. Unfortunately, all the flowers were red. There wasn't a single white one among them. After searching the entire garden, the merchant sat down and sighed. There must be a white camellia here somewhere, he told himself, and there must be some reason it didn't bloom this year. Reminding himself that things didn't always go according to plan in business, and that the same might be true for flowers, he simply shrugged and decided to wait another year. Croaked a frog, leaping into the pond with a splash. Spring, summer, fall, winter. The merchant continued to spend his days hard at work on the rich man's estate. And at long last spring came again, and the camellias began to bloom. The flowers were an even more beautiful shaded red than the year before. But there wasn't a white one among them.
Ha!
Laughed the crows. Ha! Ha! The merchant was terribly disappointed.
I guess it was just a dream after all,
He moaned, shaking his head sadly.
2 years of my life wasted.
He was staring blankly at the camellias reflected in the pond when something caught his eye. A little spot of white amid all the red and green. Leaping to his feet, he ran to the far side of the pond. There he got down on his hands and knees and crawled along, parting the branches until he found what he was looking for. A single white camellia. His heart began to beat wildly when, after a few minutes of digging beneath the flower, he found a jar just like the one the artist had drawn. And the jar was full of gold, of course. Once he'd done a fair bit of dancing and whooping and laughing and cheering, the merchant went straight to the owner of the estate and offered him half the gold. This still left him with a fortune beyond his wildest dreams, however, and he decided to return home to Edo that very day. As he was leaving, he stepped into the garden for one last look.
Idiot! Idiot!
He shouted at a frog sitting on a rock in the pond.
Dreams do come true!
Back in Edo, the man's fortunes continued to improve. And soon, my dear wonderful scholars, he was one of the wealthiest merchants in the land. Perseverance, you see, is the key to success. You know, it is interesting that that story was traded to me for a way out of the study. But I think we all found a little treasure in that tale. Oh my goodness gracious. You know, my dear scholars, I could do one more story, but I am starting to hear my voice gently giving away a little bit. So it is probably a good idea for me to stop here for now. There are many more folk tales that I have gathered away in these books. Some funny, some sad, some scary, some humorous. Oh my goodness gracious. I hope. Did anyone have a favorite story from tonight? I would love to know which of these were your favorite stories. Was your favorite story? You didn't 20, the scary one about the leave it thing? Oh, you liked that one. Interesting. Interesting. That's an interesting choice, Julian 20. It is a good one. I mean, it's a good scary one. Union 20 remind me of one that I had seen. Oh, interesting, interesting. That's to know. I know some of these stories have been adapted in media, so I'm not surprised. Zen, what was the first one you told? I missed it. What was the first one I told? The first one I told was Gunbei the Duck Hunter. This is a rather silly story, but it was enjoyable. That was a cute one. I agree. That is a cute one. But yes, I think all these stories are marvelous. There are some stories I sadly could not get to, but maybe another time we'll read some more. So then, for next week, if everything goes according to plan, remember that, my dear scholars, all these streams are always dependent on if things go according to plan and I'm not busy. So, next week, we'll be going back to our regular schedule, which means the last campfire on Monday, and we will be streaming Dr. Sin on Thursday. I am looking. It's always fun to read some of those, but it was fun to take a little break and enjoy these folk tales. So then, let's see. We can raid tonight. Um. Okay. Should we raid another reading streamer, my dear scholars? Yes. Okay, let's see if there's anyone here who's reading. There's not a lot at the moment. Our best bet tonight for reading might be Jevnes, who is reading another old book. Um, so we'll raid her. Not a VTuber, but she might be fun to visit anyway. So then, my dear, marvelous, wonderful scholars, I say unto you, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, till we meet each other again at the study. Take care, and I shall see you next time. Till then, farewell and bye bye.